Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people that love plants but not always the same ones. Today I am lucky enough to be here at Andrew's private garden, and we are in Swarthmore, PA. And Andrew Bunting is the Vice President of Horticulture at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. And you have had an incredible career in horticulture. And I was wondering if you could start us out by telling us about how you got into horticulture. Are there any, early childhood experiences, or, how did you get into this game?
Yeah, so my mother, who's, she's too old to garden now, but she still loves gardening. She gardened when I was a kid, and so I helped her doing vegetable gardening, and then really kind of got into it in high school, and she allowed me to grow things. I had some grow lights, and I grew vegetables and annuals under the grow lights, and so that kind of piqued my interest. And then I actually went to a high school that was big enough that had 2 horticulture classes. So I did those, and then that really kind of got things going, and then eventually went to school for horticulture.
Okay, and you studied horticulture at the Southern Illinois University?
Yeah.
And that's where you grew up, or did you go away to college?
I grew up in Northern Illinois. Actually, the first place I went, which was really, I would say, instrumental for my entire career, is I went to Joliet Junior College. So Joliet's in the south suburbs of Chicago. It's the oldest junior college in the United States, and at the time, and they still do, have a great horticulture program.
Okay.
So I went there for 2 years, and part of going in there for 2 years, they required that you do 2 internships. So the first year, I worked at the Morton Arboretum, which is west of Chicago, and then the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is in the north suburbs, in Glencoe, just north of Chicago. So that's when I really got interested in public horticulture as a career. I didn't know that it really existed before that. So once I went to Morton, and then Chicago, and then the next summer I went to Fairchild Tropical Gardens. And then I graduated and I actually came to Swarthmore, to the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College for a year-long internship.
And what were you doing at the Swarthmore Arboretum during that time?
Right, so at that time, that's what really introduced me to kind of plant records and curation. They didn't have a full-time plant recorder or curator. So even as an intern, I got to do all of that. And I started to get involved in a little bit of plant design, and then we were expected to give tours for garden clubs and things like that. I hated public speaking in high school, so that was kind of my first foray into having to do some type of public speaking.
Okay, and it started out as a year-long internship, but you were there for longer than that, correct?
Yeah, so I got hired full-time, I started as an intern at 86. By March of 87, I got hired as plant recorder, and then I was there for about 3.5 years, and I was really kind of itching. I had gone to England in 1987 and saw a lot of the kind of famous gardens. And I thought, I would really like to work there. And at the time, the director of the Scott Arboretum was Judy Zook, and she went on to become president of Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And she said, and it was really great advice, she said, you could, do this later in your career, but it's going to be easier to do it now. She said, I don't want to lose you, but if you want to really do this, she advocated for, essentially quitting my full-time job and going to England, which I did. I went to England and worked at Tinton Hull House with Penelope Hobhouse for 10 months or so. And then I flew to New Zealand, to the North Island, and worked with Gordon Collier, who had the famous Titoki Point at the time, for 3 months. And then I flew back kind of penniless and jobless, and I didn't have a place to live, and I lived with a family in Swarthmore. I did some side work at the Scott Arboretum, Tyler Arboretum, just some landscaping work. And then I got hired part-time at Chanticleer. It was still an estate then, but then I got hired full-time as the curator and worked there from 92 to 93 as it was transitioning to become the public garden that it is today. And then in 93, I got rehired back at the Scott Arboretum as curator. So I wanted to be curator back in the 80s. It just couldn't work out. I went to England and New Zealand, came back, it did work out, and then I worked at the Scott Arboretum for the second time from 93 to 2015.
Okay, so that was the
Yes.
long stint
Yeah,
there.
in total it's like 27 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so while you were at the Scott Arboretum, you had your own private landscape company on the side. And then is that when you bought this house and this garden was during sort of at the beginning of that time?
No, maybe the first 10 years. So I had kind of, in the beginning it was just kind of a moonlighting business. It was a friend, Tony Koya and myself, owned it together. It was, from the beginning it was called Fine Garden Creations. And it was just us, and we'd do it in the evenings or weekends or whatever. And then he moved to Aspen, and by the time he moved, I really needed a full-time person. And I hired George Petropoulos, who had been in the Professional Gardeners program at Longwood, and he was the manager and ended up being the manager for 25 years. So during that whole time I was essentially doing 2 full-time jobs, because I had the business, which by the time I left to go to Chicago and sold the business, we had about 12 full-time people and a bunch of part-time people, and did all sorts of jobs all over the greater Philadelphia area. And yes, during that period, so 99 is when I bought this house. I think I started the business in like 92.
All right, that makes sense. But it was handy though when you bought this house. It needed everything.
It was it was handy to own a landscaping business, because if I needed machinery or labor to rip out things, like, yes, they came over here and worked for me. They weren't getting, they were getting paid. I wasn't making money off it because it was my own landscape. But there was many a times where I utilized them for some of the heavier work.
So can you talk a little bit about what the state of this garden was when you first bought the house? Because I don't think it was good, right?
Yeah, no. The house it needed painting. It was in good enough shape to sell. But as far as the landscape goes, out front there was a Japanese maple, some yew bushes across the foundation, just kind of a dismal front yard. And then back here, there was a huge stump over there, a big silver maple stump. And then there were some borders with some dying trees, birches and dogwoods, lots of pachysandra and ivy, piles of wood and debris all over the place. So the first thing I did in like the fall of 99 was just clean everything up, like get rid of all the debris, get rid of the stump. I think actually in the fall of 99 we had the patio installed, so that was kind of the beginning. And I literally, like, people say, draw a sketch of your garden. I literally did it like on a cocktail napkin, and just sketched out the areas that I wanted, and which were like a cottage garden in the front, a patio here, perennial garden, woodland garden, vegetable garden. And probably based on that sketch, more or less, that's how the garden came together.
You were exposed to like all the plants in the world, quite literally. How did you choose what to start with, or what was it that was like a must-have plant for you in the beginning?
I've always, because I was the curator at the Scott Arboretum, which the emphasis is, woody trees, shrubs, and vines. So I had an affinity towards those kinds of plants. And at the time, 99, you know, I tried to buy things that were more unusual. One of the things I did at the Scott Arboretum is I was in charge of plant selection for our biannual plant sale. And we would have like 150 kind of connoisseur woody plants. So, you know, a lot of these things like that cupressus and Taxodium, Metasequoia, all came from that sale. So I was always buying from that sale. They had perennials and other things as well. And then I think because of my time, like the early days of Chanticleer, there was hardly any containers, but we, probably like in 92, we bought a bunch of Witchford pottery from a place that was going out of business. And that was kind of the beginning of the containers at Chanticleer. And my friend, friend and colleague Gary Keim at the time was working at a property in Connecticut, and he was growing a lot of unusual annuals and biennials and tropicals. So I got stuff from him, and that was kind of the beginning of my interest in those type of plants, which back then, you know, 25 years ago, was harder to find like unusual bananas and cannas and elephant ears and coleus and all that. But, you know, I wanted some of that as well. You know, especially because I had the patio, so I could have containers and start adding those type of plants. But yeah, as far as like, you know, picking individual plants, I mean, a lot of it's impulse. You know, you're out at the garden center or the nursery and you see something and buy it.
Yeah. But this is only, there's 1/3 acre, is that correct?
Yes.
So you couldn't do as many woodies as you would probably have liked to at that point.
And I also, you know, all those years I was also working at a public garden, so I didn't have to get my fill of all those plants only at my home, because we were doing, you know, at the Scott Arboretum, all the woody plants, but, you know, we also started growing a lot of containers and tropicals and annuals and perennials and all that. So, you know, I was somewhat satiated from my day job and then my landscaping business and then this as well. So
yes, and then another huge project. I mean, you had maybe 3 full-time jobs because Arboretum, landscaping business, and then this project. But you took what was sort of a non-functional garage and you turned it into a summer house. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Sure. So, yeah, so the garage is kind of 2 car lengths deep. It's kind of a narrow space, was a narrow space. And again, my friend Gary Keim, he at the time had a friend who was an architect and had left a firm, a notable firm close by here, and was starting his own firm, and he was looking for business. So, you know, for not a lot of money, he offered to do a design of what the garage could be, and he actually did a little model. And this was like 2008, I guess. You know, it was right before kind of the economy tanked, and it was actually pretty easy to go in and get a home equity line of credit, probably why the economy tanked in part. So anyways, that's what I did, because once I saw I wasn't going to do it, like really. But once I saw his little model, that's what kind of was the tipping point. And, you know, my accountant at the time said, you know, you can, you know, wait a lifetime and try to save the money, which you probably never will, or you can do it now and enjoy it, which that's the route I took. So I think it probably got built, maybe, I can't remember if it was 2008 or 2009. I do remember that I had agreed to host a party for my outgoing curatorial intern. So let's just say like June 15th, I was gonna have like 100 people here and that needed to get done, but they were literally putting doors on and painting them the day of the party.
Oh my goodness.
And I was kind of infilling with plants.
And I've heard or seen you say somewhere that you know, instead of going to the beach or you know, having a summer house somewhere, like this is it. This is your
exactly.
vacation
That's
house.
what I joke about is like around here people either go to the Pocono Mountains, or they go to the New Jersey shore, each of which takes a couple hours to get to. I tell people to go to my summer house, I walk out the back door and walk 10 steps and I'm there. So the commute's a lot easier.
And it is so much cooler.
Yeah, right.
And you said proximity to gardening, I think, was the other like upside of your summer home.
Yes. So I'm close to the garden that I want to garden in. So yeah, that's another benefit.
Your front yard is, I think that is the most recent thing maybe that's changed a lot.
Right.
So that was, when you first started, that was perennials, like sort of a cottage garden feel.
Yeah.
When did you make the move to more the gravel garden?
Right. So the front from the very beginning was kind of a cottage garden. So there was the walkway that's there now. And then on either side, I had huge masses of kind of popular perennials of the time. So like Alchemilla, Geranium Johnson's Blue, Petrinia scabiosifolia, Nepenthes Souvenir d'André Chadron, Heuchera villosa, big masses of those repeating, Amsonia hubrichtii. And then over time, some trees and stuff died, so that different areas got either more sun or less shade. And then in 2015 I was offered the job of assistant director of the Chicago Botanic Garden and director of collections, and I was 50 and I felt like, you know, if I'm gonna make a move, like that's the time to do it, even though I like you know, I had to give up, you know, or leave my friends and family and everything. I went back because, you know, I was from Chicago, so that felt comfortable. And the job was, you know, super exciting. But I couldn't reconcile selling the house. You know, financially maybe I should have. But I kept it. And then I wasn't really planning on coming back, but, you know, a number of things happened. And I, you know, approximately 5 years later, and ended up back here. And so I'd been gone, you know, more or less 5 years from the garden. And so the front had really gotten compromised. It always had a weed issue of lesser celandine and Star of Bethlehem. And plus the plants were just too wild, and it had gone kind of too far to the wild side. So I was impressed with the gravel gardens at Chanticleer, and then especially of the work of Jeff Epping in Madison, Wisconsin at Old Brick Gardens and Epic Systems, which is a huge corporate campus. So I thought, you know, maybe I'd like to do that. And, you know, I followed Jeff's recipes, and what I did is I removed about 6 to 8 inches of soil, which essentially got rid of the weed problem, because the weeds, you know, were in the top few inches of the soil, so those two weed problems disappeared. Brought in the gravel and then created the gravel garden. So that was like, I moved back into my house in 2019, and then actually started the gravel garden like right at the beginning of COVID, because then I was also in my home office looking out on this dismal landscape. So that really kind of got things moving along. Okay,
and this coincided with you joining the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society as a vice president.
Exactly. I joined or became VP of Horticulture in October of 2019. Started kind of, you know, I mean, the gardens were still in pretty good shape, but certain areas were a little compromised just because of time, and started working on those, and then kind of really, you know, put a lot of effort into the gravel garden.
Interesting. So I'm interested in the sort of, like, what you have brought to this project from your experiences in public horticulture, because you've been a public gardener for most of your career. And then are there elements of this garden that have been sort of informed by that work?
Yeah, I would say so. You know, the gardens I've worked at are Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College, Chanticleer, and Chicago Botanic Garden, and the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society have made up kind of most of the breadth of my career. You know, Scott Arboretum, Chanticleer. Well, and in my time in England and New Zealand, and then also Chicago Botanic Garden, like those. I mean, those are macro gardens, but if you look at them, they're kind of a compilation of spaces within a bigger space. So, I think that influenced me. And then actually when I worked with Penelope Hobhouse and Tintinhull House in Somerset, England, she was doing a lot of her writing, like her garden design books and color books and so forth. And one of the things she really talked about was garden rooms. So I really kind of took that to heart, and that's what's really influenced this garden. It's just a series of garden rooms. You have the gravel garden, the patio, a little driveway area, the perennial border, the tropical area, the pollinator area, shade garden, vegetable garden. So it's a bunch of little spaces within in this case, just a third of an acre.
Yeah.
So I'd say that was a big influence. I guess, always kind of the plantsmanship, just, all the different plants that I've been exposed to, over the years. And in my different jobs, and especially at the Chicago Botanic Garden, one of my jobs was, or responsibilities was, plant collecting. So we had a very robust program where we did seed collecting throughout the United States, but we had developed partnerships and had programs and collecting all over the world. So, one of those trips was to South Africa.
Oh, wow.
That we put together, and so just the kind of landscapes of South Africa, I'm sure, probably have informed the design of the gravel garden. I went to Japan 3 summers in a row to look at kind of specialty nurseries in Japan, and on and on and on. So all that, like, I see my horticulture career as like there's a big funnel. All that stuff has gone into it, and then in one way or another, it kind of informs what I do here.
Speaking of garden rooms, there's a room that isn't technically on your property,
yes.
and I find that fascinating. And I'm kind of wondering, I think maybe your, public-facing, personality, you convinced your neighbor to
yes.
let you take over part of their backyard.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe 12 years ago, and again, when I had the landscaping company, we had this design software called Dynascape. So I created a design for their backyard, and it had beautiful design and pictures around the edge of the design. And I went to them and I said, it was like in January, so I knew that they would probably be, emotionally vulnerable because it was like the depths of winter. And so I kind of rolled it out in their dining room, and I said, I'd like to propose that I install this 40 by 100 foot vegetable garden in your backyard, and I'll pay for everything. I'll do all the maintenance. I'll take care of it in perpetuity. And so they were like, yeah, why not? There was no agreement, nothing legal. Even the water line that's back there ran from my house along the property line into the vegetable garden. And 12 years on, I have kept my word and taken care of everything, paid for everything, and it's actually made us better. Like, we were friendly neighbors, but now we're much closer because of that garden.
Yeah.
And there was in that one, actually, when I was working on that, I had agreed to be on one of the open days for the Garden Conservancy. So, I was kind of fighting against time to get that finished, which we did. And so in that year that we finished, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about shared spaces. So there was one that was featured in Santa Barbara, Brooklyn, and then this one. So, it's probably not for everyone. And I've actually encroached on that neighbor as well. Probably my gardens go at least 20 feet into their yard.
Lucky neighbors, though. Your position at PHS, part of it is about ecological consciousness
Right.
and how gardening can make this a better planet. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what kind of practices are you encouraging,
Right.
or is it
Right.
PHS encouraging?
Right. So we really feel like at PHS, which is short for Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, that plants and horticulture and gardening can really be transformative for people and their lives. And we've created these principles called the Gardening for the Greater Good principles, and they're pretty basic. They have to do with like sharing knowledge in plants. They have to do with being having your garden be part of the ecosystem or the environment, and how you can do kind of sustainable, kind of ecologically responsible approaches to gardening and gardening techniques. So a lot of what I do is kind of things like this. Like I do a lot of writing and podcasts and lecturing and e-newsletters and things like that to share some of this information that we would like gardeners to consider. And then we also have public gardens. So we have 20 spaces mostly throughout the city. So areas like the Philadelphia Navy Yard, the Delaware River, Logan Circle, the Rodin Museum, Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Azalea Garden. So those are spaces that we design. We manage the gardening, whether we're doing it ourselves or through a third-party contractor. So we use those venues to kind of bring forward this kind of more ecological approach to gardening.
Interesting. And then the other side that I've noticed in my reading about what you do is the public good side, where you're supporting community gardens within the city of Philadelphia and caring for street trees. Is that? Yeah.
Yes. So we have a whole division called Healthy Neighborhoods, and there's several programs. So as you mentioned, there's a street tree program. We partner with about 180 community gardens throughout the city, workforce development, and cleaning and greening of vacant lots.
Okay.
So there's estimated to be about 45,000 vacant lots in the city. We've cleaned and greened about 13,000 and actually hire local contractors, hyper-local contractors to maintain them. So that results in about 300 jobs a year. And then we've worked with a scientist at Penn, Dr. Eugenia South, in which she's taken data, crime data, and mental health data, and what she's found, if you're within fairly close proximity to one of these cleaned and green spaces, that violent crime goes down by over 25%, and a whole host of mental illnesses such as anxiety, depression, etc. go down by almost 70%.
Wow.
And then there's other values of just having green spaces. A lot of the areas of the city where these these vacant lots exist, there aren't enough parks. There's all sorts of green equity issues. So this helps to offset some of that. And yeah, so all those programs are very much about us engaging with people. Part of what PHS does is works with community gardens, and we work with about 180 community gardens throughout the city. And these are community gardens that are organized themselves, and then we partner with them. And one of the ways we partner with them is we have a program called City Harvest. So if they become a partner in this program, we provide them with 4 different seasons of seedlings, so early spring, summer, and then kind of cool season fall crops. And then in turn, they need to commit to contributing a portion of their harvest to a food kitchen or a local food bank. And so that's been a great partnership. We also provide them with tools. We have a tool library where they can check out anything from a trowel to a rake, to a rototiller, to a cider press, to a ladder, and there's some seed and other things available through the tool library as well. And then we also work closely with another nonprofit called the NGT, Neighborhood Garden Trust. And what the Neighborhood Garden Trust does is they help these community gardens kind of own their land. So maybe originally they were just gardening on what seemed like a vacant land, piece of property or properties, and it turns out somebody actually owns them. And so the Neighborhood Garden Trust helps to secure the land in perpetuity.
That's great. And so that they don't put in all this work and then have the land sold out from under them.
Right. And then working with us and the NGT, we also can provide some infrastructure upgrades. So that might be raised beds or permanent irrigation, so they're not just relying on water barrels or fencing or or maybe like a covered area for meetings and things like that, storage sheds.
That's fantastic. So it really seems like PHS is a model of what a horticultural organization could be. Do other cities or organizations come to you for advice on what they can do where they are?
They do, especially with the vacant land program. That's been a real model. But a lot of these, whether it's the street tree program, community gardens, workforce development, cleaning and greening vacant lots, they're all models that could be replicated at scale. So, if you live in a small town and have 10 vacant lots, you could adopt one of these programs. Or if you're from a huge city like Tokyo, came and looked at our cleaning, greening vacant lots program. So, it's a model that can be used almost anywhere globally.
Excellent. I think one of the cool things too is that with these community gardens, people are getting access to land who are maybe renters and wouldn't have a place to garden. And so you're bringing a lot of new gardeners into the world of horticulture.
Yes. So there's gardeners all over the city, and they come from hundreds of different kind of ethnic backgrounds. And one of the things we actually do with our seed distribution program is try to find seed that's vegetables that they would have had in their homeland, whether it's Hispanic based vegetables or Southeastern Asian or whatever. There's if we can provide them space, then maybe they were a gardener before, or maybe they're new to gardening.
So for all of those new gardeners and for all of us, what advice do you have that can help us be better gardeners?
Yeah, I would say if you have just the smallest amount of interest, is if you can garden at home, great. If you can't, maybe find a local community garden. I would say get involved somehow, like around here, there's so many garden societies to get involved with. Like just in my little town here in Swarthmore, we have the Swarthmore Horticultural Society or the Environmental Advisory Committee. A lot of those can be kind of fringe with gardening, but then there's all sorts of specific gardening groups. There's the Master Gardeners. Almost every county in the United States has a Master Gardener program through usually a state university, in this case in Pennsylvania it's Penn State. And then there's more specific plant societies, like around here there's Cactus and Succulent Society, and the Gesneriad Society and Begonia Society, and goes on and on and on. So there's lots of ways to get knowledge. Of course, joining local public gardens, whether it's PHS or within a 50-mile radius of Philadelphia, there's about 50 public gardens, so that's another place to kind of gain knowledge. And then I would say, do it. So, whether you're living in a high-rise and maybe your only form of gardening might be houseplants, or it might be a patio garden or a small space garden or, home garden. Gardening's all about trialing things, failing, learning, and then kind of embellishing, and everything gets better over time.
That's true, and I think your garden has shown us that even the experts try things and try new things and do things over.
Yeah, I've had many, probably more failures than successes. So there's areas of my garden I've probably redone 4 times. You know, I have trees that are looking good one year and then are dead the next, or, you know, just all sorts of things happen in the garden. But, you know, I will say the successes do probably outweigh the failures.
That's reassuring. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.